It is my great pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Kaylee Bauer from MIT, who is going to talk to us about the tiniest, oldest galaxies that merged into the Milky Way, and we're really excited to hear about that. So, without further ado, Kaylee.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Yes, my name is Kaylee. I'm very excited to be here with you today to be able to talk about my work the last several years studying the tiniest, oldest galaxies that helped to merge to form us in our galaxy today. So first, a bit of background information. My specific subfield is actually called Galactic Archaeology. And what galactic archaeologists like myself are interested in is tracing the history and the formation of the Milky Way galaxy by looking at things we can see today. So detailed observations of stars, gas, the dwarf galaxies that are satellites around the Milky Way today. And so, similar to traditional archaeologists that are interested in studying the history of humanity by looking at really old artifacts, we're interested in learning about the history of the galaxy by looking at really old stars, really old galaxies. And as for the galaxy that we live in, the Milky Way, I'm sure you're familiar. This is a nice little diagram of it from the side, so you can't quite see the spiral arms. You're seeing them you're looking into the plane of the galaxy in this diagram. So, just to kind of walk through what our Milky Way is like. Right down in the center, you have the bulge with a lot of stars. You have the thin disk right there, which is where the spiral arms are located. And also where we ourselves are located, that's where Earth is, about 8 kiloparsecs from the center. You also have the thick disk, which is kind of this puffed up disk around the thin disk, also with quite a few stars. So this is where most of the stars that formed in our galaxy, and most of the stars in our galaxy are located, right down here in the center. But if you move farther out, you can still find stars. And those are the stars that are located in what's called the stellar halo. So these are the extended outskirts of our galaxy. This is true for any galaxy. The extended outskirts are called the stellar halo. And you can find a lot of interesting stuff in this region of the galaxy. So you can find metal-poor stars, which are really old stars. You can find the dwarf galaxies that still orbit us today. You can find some globular clusters, which are just groups of stars. So if we're looking at this is what we see today. But we want to know what happened in the past. So we know kind of really big picture things. We know that galaxies form hierarchically. That's pretty well understood. That we know that the main way that galaxies get bigger is by eating other galaxies. They grow through mergers to get bigger and bigger over time. This is called accreting galaxies. You accrete galaxies over time, you get bigger and bigger. So we know that this is what happened to make the Milky Way, but we don't know the specifics. So this is something that's understood. What we don't understand is exactly what galaxies merged to form us, when did they merge, what were any of those like. So this is what galactic archaeologists want to understand, to better understand where we came from. So the stellar halo that I was just talking about gives us a lot of potential information to help us learn about this past. And this is because when a galaxy merges with the Milky Way, it comes in, it's disrupted by gravity, it gets tidally disrupted, and the stars that are in that accreted galaxy get stripped, and they end up all over the place. And in particular, they end up in these extended outskirts. So you can see here on this simulation, the ex situ stars, or the accreted stars, the stars that came in on mergers. Those are located all over the place, and particularly they're located in the stellar halo. Versus if you look at the in situ stars, the one that formed in the galaxy, those are mainly just in the bulge and disk that I was pointing out in the previous diagram. So if you're looking into the stellar halo, you're seeing a fossil record of the many dwarf galaxies that merged to form us. So we believe this to be true, and we can look at these stars in the halo today, and we can measure their chemicals, we can measure their kinematics. But of course, this is a really complex, really messy system. So how do we actually interpret all this data that we're able to get? How do we decipher the fossil record? And maybe a bit more specific question is, how can we identify which stars originated in which types of dwarf galaxies so we can start to learn about the mergers in our past? One way to do this, to start bridging the gap between the data we're able to get today and these really messy, complicated physical systems, is cosmological simulation. So this simulation is one of 35 simulations that I've worked with a lot during my time in my PhD. And so this is part of it's called the Caterpillar Cosmological Simulation Suite, where we form a lot of different Milky Way mass galaxies. So this galaxy right here in the center would be the Milky Way mass galaxy. And over time, you can see it accreting a bunch of little galaxies to get bigger and bigger until eventually you hit present day, and you see what we may be able to see. And so the interesting thing about this simulation suite is that we're able to, because we have 35 different Milky Way mass galaxies, we're able to probe different possible formation histories and see how, what differences end up in that we might be able to see in present day. And so this is a really useful way to start trying to interpret all the data that we're able to get on the Milky Way today. And one additional bit of background information is I mentioned that when we look at the stars in the stellar halo, that we are able to measure their chemicals and their kinematics. And so chemicals are very useful as one of the main things we can see in a star today. But not all chemicals are equally interesting, in my very unbiased opinion. They all have hydrogen, but not all of them have these rare chemical elements that are called the R-process chemical elements. So the R-process chemical elements, there are a lot of the heavier elements on the periodic table. So if anyone in the audience is wearing gold or platinum, these are formed in a very specific nucleosynthetic process that requires a lot of energy and a lot of neutrons. And that's it's the way that we form all these things in purple here on the periodic table. So this is a rare, prolific event in the universe. You can't just form these anywhere. And so that makes them very interesting, especially if you're interested in seeing where stars may have formed originally. If you see them having one of these particular types of elements, that could help us learn about that past. And so one of the astrophysical sites that we have confirmed to be a site of this R process, this nucleosynthetic process, is neutron star mergers, because lots of neutrons, lots of energy. This was observed in 2017, along with the LIGO observation of two neutron stars colliding, and it was a very exciting, confirmed site, but there may also be more possible sites. Now, since this is not particularly like an astro crowd, and also, it's a short talk, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on all the science details, but just kind of step through a lot of the interesting questions that we have been able to start answering with some of these high-resolution simulations. I want to just kind of mention some of the results that we've had over the last few years that I'm particularly excited about. So there is one question: if you see a star with R process elements, could it have primarily formed in, this is, I'm finally getting to the tiniest, oldest part of the talk, could they have formed in the tiniest dwarf galaxies that merged into us? And one reason we'd be interested in this is because these tiny dwarf galaxies don't contribute a lot of stars on the whole, but they are an important part of our merger history, because there are dozens of them that we expect to have merged into us over time, even though they only contribute maybe a few percentage of stars overall. It's still an important aspect of the history. And if there is some possible link between these R-process stars and these tiny dwarf galaxies, we could have some sort of picture like this, where sometime in the past you have this, this Milky Way mass galaxy, previous analog that would be shown here in blue. It's accreting a bunch of these little galaxies. There's some rate of enhancement in these R-process chemical elements. And then they all get tidally disrupted, stripped apart. And then in present day, we see some of these R2 stars are just stars with lots of R process. We see some of these R2 stars in the halo, and then we can link that back to the past and learn about maybe how many of these galaxies merged with us, and things like that. And we can start learning about the smallest building blocks of our galaxy and recreating the low mass end of the Milky Way assembly history. So, just jumping straight to the conclusion, we simulated this. We only formed these types of stars in these tiniest dwarf galaxies. And very exciting, yes, there does appear to be a possible link. Normally, there's only a few percentage chance of a random star being from one of these little galaxies. But if you see a star with these elements, we now believe that there's over a 50% chance it may have come from one of these galaxies, which is very exciting. And now these stars could provide a way for us to study these early galaxy formation situations. And there's been now a big push also of people collecting more and more data on these types of special stars with these special elements. In addition, another question there was, could these elements, the R-process elements, could they have formed from collapsing stars? I already mentioned we know that neutron star mergers are one way that these form. But there's some issues with neutron star mergers in the early universe. We don't know if they can form quickly enough, like you can get the merger quickly enough to get these elements and the ways that to explain the observation that we see and the scatter and all of this. So we modeled using core collapsed supernova, which are collapsing stars. And we actually were able to film a self-consistent model that also could explain observations in the early universe. So maybe we don't actually need neutron star mergers with their potential issues in the early universe to form these elements. So this is also learning about the origin of heavy elements in the universe as well. And then I guess one also final quick question. I've been talking about the chemical elements. We can also, once again, observe dynamics and kinematics, where they're located and how fast they're moving in different directions. And from that, you can get their energy, you can get their angular momentum. And some of these are conserved quantities, quasi-conserved quantities, because it's a time-varying potential. But in theory, maybe we could use these kinematics to identify stars from tiny galaxies. This is something people have started trying to do, and it can work for the larger galaxies. So we were curious about if it would work for the small galaxies. So we wanted to investigate how useful this method is. And unfortunately, it's not super useful for the little galaxies. They just don't have strong enough kinematic signatures. And for the people, there had been a number of research groups trying to do this, and so we're actually advising now to be much more careful with this method, focus a lot more on the chemicals, which seem to have a much stronger link, even though energy is useful still. That was the one thing that we did see. So that was just some of the questions we've been able to answer over the last several years with some of these simulations. But of course, a ton of questions still remain. So, mixing in the galaxies, turbulent mixing, is important when, for which chemical elements end up in which stars. Individual stellar feedback is, of course, also important. But all these are especially important for the littlest galaxies, and also especially important if you're trying to get good chemical abundances, which has been a lot of the focus of our work. But unfortunately, if you're modeling an entire galaxy, you can't also, it's way too computationally expensive to also model individual stars, individual gas mixing, things like that. So this has just always been too computationally expensive until now. So this is a very exciting thing that we've been working on for the last 2 years, my group and I, where this is what we've been calling the AOS project, or High Resolution Cosmological Hydrodynamic Simulations. This is one of our big parent boxes. Our fiducial model is actually our fiducial box is going to be a little bit smaller than this, but you can still see, this is the cosmic web, so there's quite a few galaxies that will end up being in this. But at the same time, there's going to be individual star particles. So we really want to have a good, much better capture of the chemical abundances of stars, and so that's why we're doing these detailed stellar yields, detailed stellar feedback, metal enrichment, enhanced refinement around each star. And so this is very exciting because generally in these simulations, you have one particle representing hundreds of stars. Now we have one particle representing one star. And so this has been a really big push on, in really taking as much advantage of high performance computing as we can, really focusing on all the subgrid models and, increased parallelization. And we've finally, with time, started actually being able to resolve these things. So we're hoping to have our first paper out on this within a few months, and it's been very exciting to be working on. Yeah, so I'm not going to get into the technical details of it, but the basic detail is we're running both a fiducial box with and without the individual stars to show how things differ, and also doing a few zoom simulations, while throughout that tracing in a lot of detail different metals in the stars. So I'll just, leave it at that, but the main takeaway is that simulations and high-performance computing is just completely vital to, bridge the gap between all this really detailed data we're able to get the literally astronomical amounts of data, pun intended, on the stellar halo that we've been acquiring and the models that we need to help explain them. So you need to have supercomputing involved in order to actually capture all the details that are useful and needed to interpret this data. Already, we've been seeing that our process chemical elements and energy information can tell us about whether a star accreted from the smallest galaxies to merge to form the Milky Way. So this is going to start helping us learn about this low mass end of the assembly history. And right now, we are poised to continue uncovering the formation history of the Milky Way. Thank you.